Yo guys, good evening. We are back tonight with another commentary for a game called 8 Man. There's really not much to say about this game, I think. Not in the typical sense that you would think. So we're going to try to do as much commentary as we can, jot down some personal thoughts and feelings, about my time going and recording this, and then whatever happens, happens. We'll go from there. So with 8 Man, I think it's kind of peak Japanese fuckery. And what I mean by that is, most games that you get from Japan, they're always a little bit weird, right? Like, Japan is really, really good in that regard, I think. They just kind of sit there and they're like, oh, okay, let's just add a little bit of weirdness to try to keep the player entertained. And I noticed with, like, a lot of Western games, they don't really ever do this. Like, even back then, we didn't really see a lot of Western developers doing this. A lot of the strange stuff was rolling out of Japan, and I actually really like it. It's one of the reasons why I gravitated towards Japanese games for as long as I did. So, with 8 Man, there's like a lot of robots and mutants and, Power Rangers-esque style superhero get-ups, and like it was some really silly stuff. And the older I get, I find the more I appreciate it. The art direction, as always, is on point with every other SNK game, The game is really, really fun to play. I find that with 8 Man, it doesn't really do a whole lot of new stuff. It just kind of sticks with that SNK arcade formula that at this point, we've kind of all grown to love and everything else, So it kind of, I feel, revels in its goofiness. It's like the people over at SNK were holding a business meeting one day. Like, everybody was sitting down there having a board meeting. And they were like, okay, we've got all these other games. We've got sports games. We've got, shoot 'em ups. We've got everything. What can we possibly do to entertain our players now? We've done it all. And I feel like somebody just kind of raised their hand in the back, right? Like, somebody just raised their hand, like, really, really high. And, like, the guy up front was like, yes, you, in the back. How about we have a weird superhero game where the person's wearing a weird leotard and then, like, has a weird crest on their head and wears a visor. And we can have them fight mutants and robots and all this other stuff. And then, like, the guy up front was just like, fuck it. I like it. Give this man a job. I feel like that was pretty much the entire encompassment of what 8 Man is. Like, it doesn't really take itself too seriously. There's no super serious storyline, there's no real hardcore gameplay. It's not a terribly difficult game, it's just one of those games where you go and you play it and you just kind of appreciate what's there. And I think that's what 8 Man kind of excels at the most, like, it doesn't take itself too seriously. It's meant to be loud and it's meant to be goofy, and it's really, really lovely in that regard. So I think around the time I had started filming 8 Man, I became really aware of the inadequacies of my setup. So the interesting thing is, when I started doing long plays, I kind of sat down and I was like, okay, well, we're going to go ahead and do this, and I have a limited amount of equipment. I want to see if I can make it happen. So all of my long plays started off on a Mac Mini. And it was like a 2012, well, it is a 2012 Mac Mini. And I didn't really expect it to do anything. I started clowning around with OpenEmu a fair bit. And once I saw how well it was running everything, I kind of said, maybe I can actually record something. So it was like a lot of learning, I think, because at the time I didn't know that Apple had like really squirrely software. Like, I hadn't touched a Mac in a really long time. I was in this process of going and trying to get back into the ecosystem because I was actually raised off of Mac OS and MS-DOS. And then at the time, I think Windows 3.1 was a thing. So, but before all the other operating systems, I was more or less raised on Mac OS. It's what my school at the time used over in the computer lab and stuff, back when computer labs were still a thing. So I was in the middle of trying to get back into the ecosystem. I had purchased a late 2012 Mac Mini with like 16 gigs of RAM and an i7, and I wound up doing a hard drive transplant to put an SSD in it and like all this other stuff. And I was kind of sitting there doing my thing, and I was like, all right, let's go ahead and see what it can do. And it excelled at emulation for really old stuff. It doesn't run like PSP or GameCube well, but given the age of the Mini, you know, it doesn't really surprise me too much. So eventually I got to the point where I was like, you know, I've been wanting to go and work on old games for a while now. I get kind of tired of doing clips. A lot of people have been recommending that I go and do long plays. You know, how do we go about doing this? And so I had my ROMs back from when I was backing up my game library and stuff because the discs were starting to succumb to rot and a bunch of other things. And I had downloaded OpenEMU, which is a very, very lovely emulator suite for Mac OS. It hasn't been updated in quite some time, but it's actually still really solid. So I was like, okay, you know, let's go ahead and get these games running, and I would play them, and then I was like, okay, well, you know, I'm gonna start filming these, and, you know, I was like really, really hesitant about it because being legally blind, I'm actually bad at a lot of these games. I realized that a lot of people show up to see like really good gameplay and stuff all the time, and I said to myself, you know, is there a market for somebody going with low vision and doing these games? You know, is that even entertaining for somebody to watch? And so eventually I was like, you know, people aren't really going to enjoy watching somebody die all the time. And so I eventually said, fuck it, I'm going to do it anyways because I want to show people that you can be blind, and with enough perseverance and time and practice, you can go and, you know, beat these games and stuff. So I'd gotten around to going and trying to record on the Mac, and it just wasn't happening. Recording apps for it via the store were just really awful. A lot of them didn't really work a lot of the time. So a friend of mine had told me about QuickTime, and he's like, yeah, you can use the QuickTime player to record your screen. And I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. But it would have no audio, so I had to use a bunch of third-party software just to get audio in the door. And then I had to tweak and tune the audio just to get it to sound right. Like, it was really haphazard early on trying to get a lot of this setup running. And so for that first entire initial salvo of long plays, all of it was filmed on a Mac. You know, using OpenEMU. And so with OpenEMU, they don't have anything like Stretch or anything like that. Everything is presented in 4:3, which is fine. You know, it doesn't bother me. The only thing that bothered me is that it leaves black boxes on the side, you know, and I just wasn't really a super huge fan of that. So the main issue that I had was I was constantly working around these limitations. And so I've been trying to accelerate the hardware growth for a while now. And so I wanted to take a lot of my Let's Plays on the road, so I had the Odin, and it does a good job, you know, for what it's worth. For the amount of time that I put into it and stuff, it's actually a really good investment. Being on the Android ecosystem is actually quite nice with it and stuff because it gives me a whole wealth of apps that just work beautifully and I can do whatever I want to on it. But I found as time went on, I was like, okay, it's cool to have the Odin, it's cool to have it be able to be taken on the road and stuff, I adore that, but I want to be able to do more on the Macintosh. And so I went ahead and I was looking at the Mac Mini, and I've become more painfully aware of the limitations it has. And so one of the big issues is that with newer Macs, they don't really like third-party software. You know, like they openly admitted in future versions of the OS that they're going to stop supporting unsigned software and stuff. Well, the only reason that these long plays were happening early on was because of unsigned software like Soundflower and a couple of other things that I would use to actually get things in the door. And then other limitations of the Mac I found that I didn't really care for revolved around the rendering aspect of it. So a lot of these were rendered in, well, edited and then later rendered in iMovie. It's what I used to actually go and start doing long plays. The problem that I have is iMovie has really nasty limitations to it. And so early on, I was like, oh, it's cool that I'm using iMovie, and I was like really proud of it, right? I would sit down and I'd be like, oh, this is so cool, I really, really enjoy this, but I found that it couldn't do certain things that I wanted it to do. It had some like really nasty limitations to it. And so one of the things is it was a toss-up between QuickTime and iMovie kind of giving me grief. So with QuickTime, it was literally going, and it was a flawless recording to a certain extent. It would go record my screen, which is set up for 720p to make things a little bit bigger because my vision is just fucking dog shit. and then it would record it by default in 60 frames. So it would give me almost a flawless recording right off the bat. Whatever was happening would be recorded very faithfully. I had no issues with it. It would go and capture it in MOV format. So I would have to go and port the MOV file over to iMovie, and then after I was done editing it, I would have to save it as an MP4. And I was like, okay, this ain't too bad. The problem that I have with using iMovie, and it's still an ongoing issue during this growth phase, is that it doesn't really give me a lot of options for things that I want to do. It is a good program for beginners to learn on, and it's very easy, and you can pick it up and you can do things very easily on it. But I find that for most other things that I would have to go with Final Cut or DaVinci Resolve, or, you know, like just another program, because iMovie has really nasty limitations. So it's good in some aspects, it's really bad in other ones. So a lot of these Let's Plays have black bars on the side because they're trying to preserve the aspect ratio, and that is a consequence of the emulator. That's fine. What I wanted to do at some point is, and I had asked this on Twitter, I think this week, I flat out asked everybody, I was like, hey, you know, should I go and remaster all of the old long plays and then just chop the black boxes off of the side to give it the proper aspect ratio of 4:3? And I sat and I threw the poll out there, and everybody was like, yes, do it, please, yes, like, it was my most successful poll on Twitter, and it had the fastest response time. So people have been letting me know that they hate the black boxes on the side, which is fine. I get it. I don't really care for them either. The problem is that with iMovie, trying to go and trim the sides is a fucking act of God, and I hate it. So what it would literally boil down to is me going and, because strangely enough, iMovie, while it's free, I find that there were literally better rendering apps that were also faster on the Android side of things. So rendering, strangely enough, on my Android handheld is a lot faster than it is on the Mac. And it has about the same quality. It's a little bit less, but not really enough to be worth a damn or even really notice. So I find that as I continue this journey down the road, as I continue to go and do gameplay and figure out what works and what doesn't work and all those other things, I find that I'm becoming painfully aware of the Macintosh's limitations, of iMovie's limitations. And so I'm sitting here and I'm looking at it, and I've been doing basically a hardware refresh. So the handheld was nice for taking things on the go, but I find that I'm looking more towards my internal setup. And so I know that I'm going to be due for a new monitor pretty soon, because mine, the Mac does not really like using it too much. Even though it runs 1080p just fine, the Mac will sometimes fight with it. Sometimes things will just run off the side of the screen. Like, it just does not, the Mac Mini just does not like doing standard resolution at all. So I have it locked at 720p. And then I know that I'm outgrowing the rendering software very, very quickly. I think I've been past the point of outgrowing it for a while, because I just can't really... I can do basic editing with it, but I find that I want to do more, but I can't do more. And so in order to use better editing software that equates to a faster CPU and more RAM and, you know, just things that this Mac Mini cannot do. So I've been considering for a while going and doing a hardware refresher. Another thing that I've been considering heavily is, given the limitations of what happens with the Mac, I've been considering going over to maybe a render box that runs any form of Windows on it, because a lot of the software that I would want to use, I can literally go and get for free on Windows. But I find that with the Apple ecosystem, a lot of the software is not only very expensive, but a lot of the times it doesn't really run well. And so I've been in this transitional period for like a while now. I know that I need a change. The handheld is cool, ditto. I went ahead, I got a bunch of solid state drives. I have all of my memory divvied up between that for like videos, games, things like that. Ditto. I even got a bunch of backup SD cards in case I want to take everything on the go. ditto. That aspect is done. You know, like everything so far as I can tell, is done, except for the main editing rig upgrade. Now, there's a lot of things that I like about the Mac ecosystem that I can't really do with Windows per se. Like, for example, the Magic Mouse is actually really fucking good for rendering. The fact that the entire top of it acts as a touchpad of sorts, it makes rendering very easy because I spend less time using a scroll wheel and I can just guide it with my finger. That's nice. The keyboard is nothing special, leaves a lot to be desired. I think it's just your standard Magic Keyboard and stuff. The main discrepancy that I have out of all the hardware is the Mac Mini struggling to render some videos that I make, as well as some aspects of the software. I mean, I could go and spend a ton of money on Final Cut, but at the same time, to get the hardware spec bump that I would want to be able to render that, it would be like close to a $1,600 machine. And the weird thing is when I go and I look at the specs, it's literally a $600 PC, more or less. Like, I can literally get the same spec on a $600 PC, like a tiny little render box, if you would. So I find that as I grow and as I change and stuff, I find that I'm developing certain tastes, you know, like I find that I want a lot of this stuff to be streamlined, you know, and I feel like with the Apple ecosystem, it does a somewhat okay job with it, but I can't take it as far as I want to take it. And that's really where I'm hitting the wall. And I realized this when I was going and rendering 8-Man. So this is kind of where I'm at with it. It's a little bit of a struggle. You know, there's a lot of options out there, and I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do with it. But I feel like I've been rendering enough videos where I'm starting to develop very specific tastes. And I find that it's interesting because when I started making videos, I didn't really take it seriously. I was like, I'm just going to do sloppy cuts and, you know, I'm just going to throw it out there and whoever likes it, likes it. And that was the mentality that I had when I first started doing it. And then as time went on, I was like, okay, I want the audio to be polished. I want to try to preserve the frame rate to the best of my ability. I want this, I want that. You know, like I became more of a perfectionist with it because while the resolution is not like in 4K, obviously, or any kind of high-end resolution like that, I found that there was still a certain standard that I wanted to have. And so I was like, okay, 720p minimum, 60 frames minimum, you know, 60 frames preferred. Like, there are some projects that I've had to do in 30 frames, which is fine. They don't look bad, but, like, for gameplay, I feel like if you're capturing it, it has to be at 60. And then as time has gone on and as this bare minimum style of taste is developed, I'm becoming more of a stickler about it. And I was like, you know, I really don't like those black boxes on the side, you know, can we go and cut those off? And I've become more aware, I think, of how I actually get things presented on YouTube. And it's really weird because I don't consider myself a professional by any means, but I'm getting to the point where when I render, if something's not really going and functioning quite right, I simply develop a very large distaste for it. Like if the footage is experiencing an excess of frame rate issue, I will literally go throw that entire project out and call it a flop. I had one that I posted the other day. I was trying to do a travel video of me going over to Bisbee, and the frame rate was so bad in some areas due to issues with the camera that I just kind of sat there and I said, man, I can't even really call this a complete project. And I find that mentality is dripping over to my long plays as well. So I'm becoming more of a stickler about it. It's like, okay, I want it in the proper aspect ratio. I want it to be super smooth. I want it to look good, sound good, you know, and I don't really pay attention to the resolution too much. I feel that 720p is a really good middle resolution because it still looks good on mobile. It's not super bandwidth intensive for those that are on mobile, you know, so they won't have to worry about hiking it up to 1080p or 4K, and that saves on battery because it's less work for your phone's modem, because it won't be drawing a huge amount of data. And then also, since it's in 720p, if somebody wants to watch it in 720p, I don't really have to worry about them trying to downscale it from 1080p, causing it to have artifacting. YouTube really sucks in that regard. There's been some 720 1080p videos that I've gone and looked at because I do quality control sometimes on them, and I'll sit there and I'll realize that when you downscale it to 720p, it has a little bit of artifacting, and I didn't really like that. So I was like, okay, well, instead of having them downscale and having it look like butt, how about we just go capture the screen in 720p instead of going back and forth between 1080 and 720, trying to meet that standard, you know, and we can just go leave it in 720p. It'll look good, it'll function good, you know, I won't have to worry about artifacting. And then the other thing that I like to do is I like to render all of my stuff in max quality, because I don't really like compression. Like, I really hate compression. Like, I find it murders a lot of things, which is another limitation of the hardware that I was running across. So I like to render things with max quality and stuff, and as an end result, it takes a really long time to do it. And part of that is the amount of RAM I have. The other part of it is how slow the CPU is. And so a lot of people are like, well, this is a 30-minute video. It should have not taken that long to render. And common sense would dictate, yes, you know, you're right, it shouldn't take that long to render, but I find as the hardware is aging and super old and stuff and everything else, I find that I'm starting to run into this wall where videos take a while to render. So on modern hardware, a 30-minute video would take about 10 minutes to render with quality settings. On mine, if I set it to quality and let it render, it takes an hour and a half. You know, so it's just something that I kind of pay attention to, because a lot of people are like, you know, why do these videos take so long for you to do? A lot of it is literally hardware limitation. Like, what'll happen is I'll set a video up to render and I'll literally walk away and do other stuff, or sometimes while that video is rendering, I'll go ahead and record commentary for another video. That way I can keep like some semblance of workflow going. And so that's one of the ways that I try to go and keep things kind of flowing smoothly, because it's really weird to be like, oh, okay, I have this 30-minute video here. I'm going to go ahead and take an hour and a half to render it and do nothing while it renders. So I find that to keep things flowing smooth and to maximize and consolidate my time a fair bit, I like to go and basically work on stuff in the background. But I feel like this wouldn't really be such a stagnant thing if I were to invest in better hardware and be like, oh, okay, you know, this video is only going to take 10, maybe 15 minutes instead of like an hour and a half, an hour and 20. You know, so it's something that I've been having to go and reckon with for a while now. You know, because I actually enjoy doing this. It's a fun little hobby to do on the side, you know. Like, I'm fully aware that I'm not the best at it, which, you know, that's fine. I suspect that I'll get better with time, as I have been doing, but, you know, I kind of feel like I want to do it like a little bit quicker, you know, and stuff, and I feel like this is my, oh geez, 27th video that I've done total. And I feel like that I'm kind of at that point where it's like, okay, this is what I'm looking for. This is what I want to be able to accomplish. And when you're 27 videos in, eventually you try to sit there and figure out how to speed up the process. So sometimes you'll go and you'll render a video with very relaxed compression settings. And then you'll go back and you'll rewatch it and you're like, oh man, that doesn't really look as good as I feel that it should look. And so you'll go back and you'll re-render it in quality, then you'll go and you'll watch it. And then you'll be like, you know, yeah, these settings are going to have to stay. And so there's a lot of other things I think that kind of plague the current setup, data transfer rate being one of them. The computer is so old that it takes like a hot minute to literally go and write things to SD cards. The SSDs are actually really, really fast. I almost get full speed out of them, but the SD cards I don't, because the reader is actually quite old. So it's just a lot of things that I've been forced to reckon with for like a while now. But yeah, it's just been one of those things, I think. I'm looking forward to what the future brings with it. I'm actually happy to be growing in this regard. So, but that is going to be the commentary for 8-Man. I feel like I didn't really have enough time to actually go and get all of the commentary off the plate for a change. Kind of rare for me, but for those that actually came out and stuff, I greatly appreciate your time and your effort and stuff. Thanks for all the comments you guys leave, and thanks for the occasional like that I get and stuff. And as always, thank you for your time and your energy and what you guys bring out here when you guys decide to show up. So we will be back pretty soon with another commentary. But until next time, be good to yourselves and each other. Take care.